She had 48 hours to save her family, or lose everything to a man who didn't negotiate. The debt was $700,000. The creditor was the most feared criminal organization in Korea, and the only solution they were offering wasn't money. It was her. If you've ever had to choose between your pride and the people you love, stay with me. This story doesn't end where you think it will. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled, and hit that like button before we begin. Bam! The rain had been falling since Tuesday. Zariah Coleman noticed small things when she was afraid. The way water collected in the cracks of the pavement outside her stepmother's apartment building. The sound her shoes made against the marble lobby floor. The fact that the elevator smelled like someone had been crying in it recently. She noticed these things because noticing them kept her from thinking about what was waiting on the 14th floor. She was 26 years old, black, American, and had lived in Seoul for 3 years on a teaching fellowship that had long since expired. She stayed because leaving felt like failure, and because her stepmother, Mirai, had needed her. Or so Zariah had believed. She stayed because her father had asked her to look after Mirai before he died, and Zariah Coleman did not break promises made to dead men. That was her first flaw. There were others. She knocked once and opened the door without waiting. Miri didn't answer doors anymore. The apartment was dim, the curtains drawn against the afternoon, a habit Mirai had developed sometime in the last year, alongside other habits that Zariah had chosen not to examine too closely. The woman herself was seated at the kitchen table, still in yesterday's clothes, a cigarette burning between two fingers she hadn't bothered to lift in the last several minutes. The ash was nearly an inch long. The table in front of her was covered in paper. Not just any paper. Documents. Contracts. Loan agreements with red stamps at the bottom. Zariah set her bag down slowly. She pulled out the chair across from Mirai and sat. She looked at the documents for a long time without touching them. Then she looked at her stepmother. "How much?" she said. Mirai didn't answer right away. The cigarette ash dropped onto the table. She watched it fall. "Mirai," Zariah kept her voice flat. She'd learned that panic made things worse. "How much?" 720,000, Mirai said. Her Korean was very quiet. American dollars. The number sat in the room like something physical. Zariah breathed through her nose. She had approximately $4,000 in her bank account. She had a used laptop, a box of art supplies, and a lease on a one-room studio in Mapo district that cost her more than she could actually afford. "From gambling," she said. Mirai finally looked at her. Her eyes were red, not from crying, but from the kind of exhaustion that came from not sleeping for several days. Most of it. Most of it. Zariah turned one of the documents to face her. The letterhead at the top was in Korean, the characters sharp and formal. Below the header was a name she recognized because she'd heard it in whispered conversations and read it in newspaper articles that sometimes disappeared from the internet. The CO Syndicate. And the rest? Investments. That didn't work. How long? 18 months. Zariah sat back in the chair. She looked at the ceiling. There was a water stain up there that had been spreading since the summer, and she had meant to tell the building manager about it 3 times and never had. She stared at it now. She thought about her father, about the specific way he had said Mirai's name, the softness of it, the deliberate warmth of a man who understood that love was a choice you renewed daily. She thought about the last conversation she'd had with him. In a hospital room in Atlanta, his hand around hers, his voice already thin. "Take care of her, Zariah. She doesn't know how to ask for help." She pressed her palms flat against the table. "Who holds the debt?" "I told you. The CO... I can read the letterhead. I'm asking who specifically." She tapped the document. "The name. The person." Mirai was quiet for a long moment. Seo Ji-tae. Zariah had heard the name. Everyone in Seoul who paid any attention had heard the name. Seo Ji-tae was 34 years old. He had taken control of his family's organization at 26 after his older brother died under circumstances that the police had investigated twice and closed without charges both times. He was known for 2 things: absolute precision in business matters and an absolute absence of mercy when people failed to honor their agreements. She picked up the top document. She read it. Her Korean was good enough to understand the key terms, and what she understood made her mouth go dry. The debt had been called in full. 48 hours to respond, or the claim extended to all associated assets, including the apartment, the furniture, and the two remaining properties in Mirai's name outside Seoul, one of which had been left to her by Zoraya's father, her father's property. "There's more," Mirai said. Zoria set the document down. She was very still. "They contacted me this morning." Miri's voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. "There's a representative coming here tomorrow. They said—" She stopped. "Say it." "They said Mr. Seo has a proposal, a different arrangement, for settling the debt." Miri finally crushed the cigarette out, grinding it down hard. "He wants to meet you." The room went very quiet except for the rain. Zoria looked at her stepmother for a long time. She looked at the woman her father had loved, who had been kind to her when she was a teenager and complicated and grieving, who had cooked American food badly and Korean food beautifully, who had sat with her through 2 nights of jet lag when Zoria first arrived in Seoul, and talked about nothing important for hours because she understood that silence could be cruel. She thought about what kind of person did this, accumulated $700,000 in secret debt. Let it reach this point. Let it become someone else's problem. She thought about what kind of person sat across from that and didn't walk away. Then she picked up her bag. "I'll be here in the morning," she said. The representative arrived at 9 a.m. and was not what she expected. She had expected someone aggressive, someone who would use the smallness of the apartment as a power tool, who would spread documents across the table and speak in a voice designed to make you feel stupid. Instead, she got a man in his late 40s in a very good suit who spoke with the careful formality of a lawyer and introduced himself as Park Sung-jin, Director of External Relations for the Seo Group. He brought tea. He brought pastries from a bakery she recognized, the expensive one near Gyeongbokgung. He set everything out with quiet efficiency, and then he sat down and folded his hands and looked at Zoria with the expression of a man delivering news he had delivered before. "Mr. Seo appreciates your willingness to meet," he said. "I don't know what I'm willing yet," Zoria said. "What's the proposal?" Park blinked once. He had probably expected her to start differently. He recovered smoothly. "Mr. Seo wishes to offer a full resolution of the outstanding debt, including the cancellation of all associated claims against connected properties." "In exchange for what?" "A marriage arrangement." He said it the same way you would say any other business term: clean, neutral. A legal marriage for a contracted period of not less than 1 year, after which both parties would be free to pursue a dissolution. Zoria heard Mirai make a small sound from the kitchen doorway. She didn't look at her. "To Seo Jite," Zoria said. "Yes." "Why?" Park paused. "That information is what I'm asking for." She kept her eyes level. "He's one of the wealthiest men in Korea. He doesn't need a wife. He's 34 years old and apparently hasn't needed one for 34 years. So I want to know why he wants one now and why he wants it to be me specifically, because my name being attached to this debt is not an accident, is it?" There was a longer pause this time. Park looked at her with something that might have been the beginning of respect, which told her she had landed on something real. "Mr. Seo will address your questions personally," Park said carefully. "He is prepared to meet with you today, if you are willing." "Where?" "He prefers his office." She thought about that. Walking into the Seo building, sitting in a room with a man who ran a criminal organization and had, apparently, purchased her stepmother's debt and shown up with a marriage proposal. She thought about her father's property. "Give me an hour," she said. The Seo Group's Seoul headquarters was a glass tower in Gangnam that didn't look like what it was. It looked like every other corporate skyscraper in that district. Clean lines, security desk in the lobby, men in expensive shirts moving through the atrium with tablets and coffee cups. The only difference was the way people moved around it. Not through it, around it. Like it had its own gravitational field that everyone in the neighborhood had quietly learned to account for. Park met her in the lobby and walked her to a private elevator without speaking. The elevator required a key card and went directly to the 32nd floor. When the doors opened, she stepped into a space that looked more like a private apartment than an office. Dark floors, low lighting, floor-to-ceiling windows showing a rain-gray Seoul below. There was a desk at one end and a seating area at the other, and absolutely no one in the room. "He'll be with you shortly," Park said. And then he was gone and the elevator doors closed. She stood in the middle of the room and breathed. She had prepared for this. In the taxi, she had run through versions of the conversation in her head, tried to anticipate what leverage looked like in a room like this, and how to find it. She had done what she always did when she was scared. She had made a list of what she knew, what she didn't know, and what she needed to find out. What she knew, the debt was real. The properties were collateral. Walking away meant watching Mirai lose everything her father had worked for. What she didn't know, why her? Why a marriage and not money? What he actually wanted from this? What she needed to find out? Whether he could be reasoned with. She heard the door before she saw it. A quiet sound from a panel in the far wall that opened directly into the room. No frame, no visible hinge, just a section of wall that moved. And then Seojite walked in. She had seen photographs. The photographs had not done what photographs usually failed to do, which was convey presence. He was tall for a Korean man, broad through the shoulders, dressed simply in a dark suit with no tie. His face was... She pulled her attention back to his eyes, because that was the thing. His eyes were watching her with a quality of attention that she had never felt from a stranger before. Not aggressive, not predatory, just completely, absolutely still. He crossed the room and stopped at a distance that was formal and correct and said nothing for a moment. Then, Zariah Coleman. Not a question, not a greeting exactly, just her name, said in English without accent. Seoji Tai, she said. Something shifted in his expression, barely, like a card moved a millimeter in a hand he was holding close. He gestured to the seating area. She walked to it and sat. He sat across from her. Between them on the low table there was already a document, a contract printed on good paper, laid flat and waiting. He didn't reach for it. You came, he said. You expected me not to. I didn't know. He looked at her directly. I thought you might send a lawyer. I don't have a lawyer. She kept her hands in her lap, loose. I also don't have $720,000. So here I am. He nodded once, slowly. I'll tell you what I told Mr. Park to tell you, and then I'll tell you what I didn't tell him to tell you. His voice was very quiet. It was the kind of quiet that meant he never needed volume. The formal proposal is what you already know. A legal marriage. 1 year minimum. Full cancellation of the debt. No claim against the properties. He paused. Complete freedom of movement during the contract period. Separate residences within the household. No physical obligations. The pause before physical was the first human thing she had noticed about him. And what didn't you tell Park to tell me, she said. He was quiet for a moment. That you have a choice. He said it like the words cost something. My people, Park, the legal team, they believe you're here because you have no option. That the debt and the properties make this a transaction with only one viable outcome. He looked at her. I want you to know that I understand there are ways you could leave this room and still find a path through. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. She studied him. But I would like you to consider the proposal. He reached forward and turned the contract so she could read it without picking it up. The terms are written to protect you, not me. There are exit clauses at 90 days, 6 months, and the full year. There are financial provisions in your name regardless of when you exit. There's a clause about the press. He said this last part carefully. There will be a public response to this marriage. It won't be kind to you. She looked at the contract without reading it yet. You've thought about this for a while. Yes. Why? She looked up at him. I want an honest answer, not a legal one. Why me? He held her gaze for what felt like a long time. The rain hit the windows. 32 floors below, Seoul went about its business without any knowledge of this room. Because you're the right person for it, he said finally. It was not a full answer. She knew it. He knew she knew it. She filed it away. She picked up the contract and read it. It took 20 minutes. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't check his phone. He simply waited with that quality of absolute stillness that she was beginning to understand was not performance. It was just him. The way some people filled a room with noise and motion, and this man filled it with something else entirely. The terms were, as he said, written to protect her. The exit clauses were real. The financial provisions were significant. Enough to change what was possible for her after. The property protections were airtight. There was a confidentiality clause that went both ways, and a press management clause that committed his organization's resources to managing public narrative, though she understood without being told that there were limits to what even the CO organization could control. She set the contract down. She looked at him. She thought about her father. She picked up the pen from the table. She signed. The silence that followed was strange. She had expected something, relief maybe, or the particular cold clarity that came after a large decision. Instead, she felt the pen still in her hand and heard the rain and watched Seoji Tai look at the signed contract with an expression she couldn't fully read. Something in his face had shifted. Something had loosened very slightly around the eyes. "You didn't think I'd do it," she said. He looked up at her. "No," he said quietly. "I didn't." She put the pen down. "Then we have something in common." She stood. "We both surprised me." The news broke in 36 hours. She hadn't expected it to be fast, but it was fast. Someone inside the legal process had talked. And by the following afternoon, the entertainment and gossip circuit of Seoul's elite social ecosystem had received the information and was already doing what it did with information, which was twist and compress and weaponize it. By evening, her name and face and a photograph taken from her public social media were circulating alongside Seoji Tae's in a story that had already decided what she was: a foreigner, an American, a woman with no money, no connections, no family name worth speaking of in Korea, who had somehow maneuvered herself into a marriage with one of the city's most powerful men. The comments were not subtle. She sat in her Mappo studio, which she hadn't given up yet. The contract said she had 2 weeks to arrange a move to the CO estate, and she intended to use all 2 weeks. And she read through the headlines on her phone because she needed to know what she was walking into. Her friend Destiny, calling from Atlanta, got through on the 3rd attempt. "Z." Destiny's voice came through the speaker, tight with the particular anxiety of someone who has been trying to reach you for hours. "What the hell is going on over there?" "I got married," Zoraya said. Silence. Then, "You... what?" "Contractually. It's a contract marriage. It's a long story." "Zoraya, you don't do impulsive things. You are the least impulsive person I know. You made a spreadsheet before you switched shampoos." "I know." "So, what happened?" She looked out the window at the rain, which had not stopped. It felt like it hadn't stopped since Tuesday. "Mirai happened." She paused. "And I think I need you to not react to this for about 60 seconds while I tell you, because your initial reaction is going to be the wrong one, and I need you to get past it," she told her. Destiny's initial reaction was, as predicted, the wrong one. Several specific words about Mirai, a couple about Ji-Tai, one about Zoraya's judgment. Then Destiny was quiet for 60 seconds. Then, "Is he going to hurt you?" "No." "How do you know?" "I looked at him," Zoraya said, "and I read the contract." "Z, contracts. I know what contracts are. I also know what a man who wants to hurt you looks like. And he didn't look like that." She paused. "He looked like someone who'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time." Another silence. Then Destiny said very carefully, "You notice too much about people. That's always been your problem." "I know." "Okay." A long exhale. "Okay. Tell me about the house." The Seo estate was in Seongbuk-dong, in the hills north of the city proper, behind walls and gates, and a long driveway lined with trees that had been planted in a very specific pattern that she suspected meant something she didn't know about. The house itself was large in a way that was not ostentatious. It had been built to last rather than to impress, and there was something almost severe about its lines that she found she preferred to the excessive ornamentation of the other properties she'd glimpsed in this neighborhood. Park met her at the gate and walked her through. 2 staff members took her things without speaking. Jitae was not present, which she had not expected. Her rooms were on the east wing, 2nd floor. 3 rooms, a bedroom, a sitting room, a small office, that had been prepared with a thoroughness that suggested either significant staff effort or that someone had paid close attention to what she might need. There were art supplies on the desk in the office, quality materials, the specific brands she'd used in her fellowship years, not the generic purchases of someone who'd Googled artist supplies. There was a bookshelf already half populated with books in English, a mix of fiction and art theory that was not random. She stood in the office and looked at the books and felt something uncomfortable move through her chest. She went back downstairs. Park found her in the east corridor. "Is everything—" "Who chose the books?" she said. He blinked. "The books in your study were selected by Mr. So." She nodded once. She walked back upstairs. She did not know how to hold that. She put it on a shelf in her mind, next to the thing about the art supplies, next to the thing he'd said in his office. "You have a choice." And she left it there because she didn't have the room to examine it yet. She met him again at dinner on the third evening. The first 2 evenings she had eaten in her rooms, which had been left as an option without comment. On the third evening, she came downstairs and found him already at the dining table, alone, reading documents while a staff member set plates. He looked up when she walked in and stood, which was not something she'd expected, and waited while she sat. "You don't have to stand," she said. "My mother would disagree." She sat. He sat. The staff member left them. "How are the rooms?" he said. "Fine." She paused. "The art supplies were specific. I don't know how you knew the brands." He was quiet for a moment. "Your fellowship portfolio is public record." She looked at him. He was looking at his plate, picking up chopsticks, apparently very focused on a piece of Gion that did not require that much attention. "Right," she said. She ate. He ate. It wasn't comfortable exactly, but it wasn't what she'd expected either, which was an aggressive performance of power or some version of ownership. He ate like a person eating dinner, not like a man demonstrating his domain. "The house is very quiet," she said after a while. "Yes." He looked up. "Is that a problem?" "I'm figuring out if I like it." Something at the corner of his mouth shifted. Not quite a smile. A thing that lived in the neighborhood of a smile. "Let me know when you decide." After dinner, she went back to her office and opened her laptop and looked at the headlines again, because she had developed the slightly masochistic habit of reading what was being said about her. The new ones had photographs, taken apparently from a car, of her walking from the estate gate to the main door 2 days ago. Grainy, but identifiable. The captions were what they were. She closed the laptop. She thought about the corner of his mouth. She thought about that for longer than she should have before she made herself stop. The first time someone came for her publicly was at a charitable event in the third week that she attended because the contract included joint social appearances, and she had decided early on that she was not going to be the person who hid in rooms. Jitai stood beside her through the arrival, through the photographs, through the cocktail hour that preceded the dinner. Then he was called away to speak with someone, and she was left standing near the bar with a glass of wine and a collection of women in expensive dresses who had been watching her all evening with the particular attention of people who have already agreed on an opinion. Hansora was the first to speak. She was 28, beautiful in a way that knew exactly how to use itself, and had the kind of social confidence that came from never having been made to feel small in a room. She had been Jitai's girlfriend, the word used loosely, before the engagement announcement, and had made her feelings about the current situation clear in 3 separate social media posts that Zarya had read and then not read again. "Your Korean is better than I expected," Sora said. She said it in Korean precisely, and at a volume that carried to the women around her. "Thank you," Zarya said in Korean. "Did you practice for this?" A slight tilt of the head. "Or did you already know you were going to need it?" The women around her were quiet and watching. Someone near the edge of the group had taken out a phone. Zarya held her wine glass and looked at Sora. She thought about the 17 ways she could answer this. She thought about the way Destiny had told her once that the best response to a woman who was trying to make you feel small was to make her feel seen, which was harder and more frightening and more honest. "I moved to Seoul 3 years ago because I wanted to be somewhere that challenged me," Zarya said clearly. "I'm still here for the same reason." She held Sora's gaze. "Different challenge." Sora's expression shifted, just slightly. Zarya turned away before she could recover. Jitai was back at her side 4 minutes later. She didn't know how he knew. She wondered if someone had told him, or if he had simply been watching in the way she was beginning to understand he watched everything. He didn't say anything about it. He placed himself beside her with a precision that communicated, without words, without touch, exactly where his allegiance was. On the drive back, she looked out the window and said, "You didn't have to come back." "I know," he said. "I handled it." You did. A pause. I know that too. She looked at him. He was looking out his own window. The city passed between them, lit up and rain blurred. This is complicated, she said. Yes. She turned back to her window. I just needed to say that out loud. I understand, he said. And somehow, it didn't feel like a line. It felt like something a person said when they actually understood. The fourth week she went through his library, not the one on the main floor, the formal one with display shelves and the kind of books that existed to be seen. The one on the second floor near his study, which she had found by accident and which he had apparently not thought to tell her, was off limits because he had not told her anything was off limits, which was its own kind of disorienting. It was a working library, shelves of actual books, read, marked, some of them annotated in the margins in handwriting that was smaller and neater than she'd expected. History, economics, urban policy, a section of Korean literature, a section in English that included writers she loved. She pulled one out, a novel she'd read twice in college, and found a margin note halfway through in blue ink. This is what it costs. She put the book back carefully. She was starting to understand that she had walked into a situation she had thought she understood and did not understand at all. And that realization, sitting in his library with rain against the windows and the faint sound of him working in the next room, was the beginning of something she didn't yet have a name for. She was still sitting there when his phone rang in the other room, and she heard his voice drop to the register he used for things that weren't dinner conversation. She heard a single word in Korean that meant something between crisis and emergency. And then she heard silence, and then the sound of someone moving fast. She walked to the library door and looked into the hallway. Jitae was already in his coat. His face had changed. The stillness was still there, but it had a different quality now, something underneath it, something pulled tight. He saw her in the doorway. Stay in the house tonight, he said. What? Don't go out. Don't open the main gate for anyone. He looked at her with an intensity that was different from anything she'd seen from him yet. Not cold, almost the opposite. I'll explain when I'm back. When will... But he was already moving, and in 30 seconds she heard the car, and in 60 seconds the driveway was empty. She stood in the hallway of his house and listened to the rain. Her phone buzzed. A news alert. She looked at it. A body had been found outside a CO Group property in Yongdyongpo, high-level syndicate lieutenant. 3 shots. The war had started before anyone had announced it, and she was standing in the middle of it in a marriage she'd signed because she had no other choice. Except she was beginning to realize with the slow, cold clarity of someone waking up that the thing she didn't know was not whether she was safe, it was whether she cared about him. And that was a much more dangerous problem than the debt had ever been. The body in Yongdongpo had a name. Zariah found it in the morning news. Choi Byung-soo, 41. Listed in the article as a business associate of the CO Group in the careful language journalists used when they wanted to keep their jobs. The photograph was taken from a distance, police tape, and yellow markers on wet asphalt, the kind of image that told you nothing and everything simultaneously. She was on her second cup of coffee when she heard the front door. Jitae walked in at 6:43 in the morning, looking like a man who had spent the night doing something that had cost him. His suit was the same one from the night before. His face was intact, no visible damage, but there was a quality to him she hadn't seen yet, something worn through to the surface, the particular look of a person who had been holding something in place for hours through sheer force and was only now allowing themselves to stop. He saw her at the kitchen table and stopped walking. She looked at him. She looked at the newspaper folded beside her coffee cup. She looked back at him. Choi Byung-soo, she said. Something moved across his face. You read fast. I've been up since 3. She pushed the chair across from her out with her foot. Sit down. You look like you're about to fall over. He looked at the chair for a moment like he was calculating something. Then he sat. One of the kitchen staff appeared in the doorway, took in the scene, and silently began making tea without being asked. Zariah watched Jitae watch the table and thought about what Destiny had said on the phone. You notice too much about people. She thought about the margin note in the library book. This is what it costs. Are you hurt? She said. No. Anyone else? A pause. Two of mine. Not seriously. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. Do you want to tell me what's happening? Not particularly. That's not how this works. She kept her voice even. I am in this house. My name is attached to yours. Whatever is happening, I'm already in it, whether you tell me or not. She looked at him directly. So either tell me or don't, but don't insult me by pretending I'm not here. He was quiet for a long time. The staff member set tea in front of him and left without sound. There's a group, he said finally. The Yoon faction. They've been operating in the gap between our territories for about 2 years. He wrapped a hand around the tea glass. Choi was a liaison. He'd been managing a specific supply corridor that overlapped with theirs. Someone decided that overlap needed to end. Someone meaning them. Yes. And Choi. Jitae looked at the table. He was 41 years old. He had a daughter in middle school. His voice didn't change. That was the thing. It didn't change at all, and somehow that was worse than if it had. He was also, as of 6 months ago, taking money from 2 directions. Zariah set her cup down. He was working for them. We believe so. You believe. We don't have confirmation. We had suspicion. He looked up at her. Which means whoever killed him may have done it to keep him from talking, to us or to anyone else. She sat with that. Outside, the early morning was gray and cool, the garden still wet from last night's rain. Somewhere in the house, a clock she'd never located was ticking. How dangerous is this going to get? She said. He looked at her for a long moment. There was something in his expression that she thought might have been the beginning of an honest answer. Then Park appeared in the kitchen doorway, phone in hand, and whatever the honest answer was going to be went back behind the wall it came from. Sir, Park said. The call. Jitae stood. He looked at her once more, a look she catalogued without knowing yet what to do with, and left the kitchen. She sat alone with her cold coffee and the folded newspaper and the ticking clock she couldn't find. The press escalated the same week. It wasn't unexpected. She'd been monitoring it with the discipline of someone who understood that information was a tool and ignorance was a liability. What she hadn't anticipated was the angle. Not just the gold digger narrative she'd been braced for, but something more specific, more targeted. An entertainment journalist named Kwon Ye-jin, who had a YouTube channel with 4 million subscribers, and the instincts of someone who understood exactly how much damage the right photograph and the right question could do, published a video that ran 12 minutes. Zariah watched all 12 minutes. The video framed the marriage as a transaction from the perspective of the Coleman family, meaning Mirai, though Kwon was careful not to name her, careful in the practiced way of someone who had learned where the legal lines were. It described a woman with gambling debts, a foreign stepdaughter, a contract signed in a hurry. It described Zariah as someone who had positioned herself strategically. It included a photograph that she recognized, her and Jitae leaving the charitable event, his hand at the small of her back in a gesture that had been reflexive and brief, captured at the exact angle that made it look like ownership. 12 million views in 48 hours. Sora had shared it. Of course she had. Zariah closed her laptop and sat in her office and breathed for a moment. Then she opened it again and went to work. She spent 3 hours drafting a response. Not a defensive one, not a tearful one, but a precise one. The kind of thing her fellowship professors had taught her to do with her artist's statement. Know your audience, know your angle, control your own narrative before someone else finishes controlling it for you. She wrote it in English and Korean, side by side, and when she was done, she read it twice and then went downstairs to find Jitae. He was in his study with 2 men she didn't recognize, paper spread across the desk, the low-level hum of a serious conversation that stopped when she knocked on the open door. He looked at her. She held up her laptop. I need 5 minutes, she said. Something passed between him and the 2 men. They gathered their papers and left without comment. She put the laptop on the desk. Kwon Ye-jin's video. You've seen it. Yes. I want to respond. I have a PR firm. I know you have a PR firm. I want to respond. She turned the laptop so he could read what she'd written. She watched him read it. His face did the thing it did. Almost nothing, but not quite nothing. And she had learned by now to watch the edges. His jaw tightened slightly on the 3rd paragraph. On the 5th, something around his eyes shifted. He finished reading, He was quiet. "It's good," he said. "I know it's good. I'm asking if you have a problem with it. One line." He turned the laptop back to her and pointed. "Here. My marriage is not a transaction any more than anyone else's. That line will be pulled out and examined, and it will prompt a follow-up story." She read it. She crossed it out. She looked at him. "Anything else?" "No." "Then I'm posting it." He sat back in his chair slightly and looked at her with that quality of attention that she still hadn't fully classified. "You're not asking my permission. I'm asking if you have an objection that serves us both." She closed the laptop. "There's a difference." He was quiet for a beat. "No objection," he said. She posted it from the doorway, walking back to her office. It got 300,000 engagements in 6 hours. Kwon Ye-jin's follow-up was noticeably more careful. She did not tell him that. She thought he already knew. Mirai called on a Thursday. Zaraya almost didn't answer. She stood with her phone in her hand and watched it ring and thought about what she owed and what she didn't and what her father would say, and then she picked up. "You saw the video," Mirai said. Her voice was quiet and strained. "Yes. I didn't talk to her, that journalist. I want you to know. Someone did." Silence. "I know." Zarya moved to the window of her sitting room. Below, the garden was in its early afternoon stillness, the trees dropping the last of their leaves in the October air. "Mirai, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." "Zaraya, is there anyone else who knew about the debt? Anyone who knew how it got to where it was before I found out?" She paused. "Because the way Kwon framed that story, she knew things, specific things, about the timeline, about you and gambling specifically, not just money trouble." She kept her voice steady. "Who else knew?" The silence on the other end was the kind that had a shape. It wasn't the silence of someone who didn't know the answer. It was the silence of someone deciding how much of it to give. "There was someone," Mirai said finally, "someone I borrowed from before the CO debt. A private lender. He knew about the timeline." "Name?" "Zaraya. I don't think his name, Mirai." Another pause. "Yoon Dae-ho." Zaraya stood very still. She looked at the garden. She thought about the conversation in the kitchen, the name Ji-Tai had used, the Yoon faction. "Thank you," she said. Her voice came out completely flat. She hung up. She stood at the window for a long time. She found Ji-Tai in the east corridor just before 7, heading toward the dining room. "Yoon Dae-ho," she said. He stopped walking. His back was to her. She watched the set of his shoulders. He turned. His face was careful. Too careful. "What about him?" Ji-Tai said. "Mirai borrowed from him, before your organization acquired the debt." She held his gaze. "Which means Yoon Dae-ho knew about my stepmother's situation before you did. Which means he had access to specific information that ended up in a journalist's video that went to 12 million people." She watched his face. "Which also means, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, that the man currently moving on your operations had a connection to my family's situation that existed before any of this." Ji-Tai looked at her for a long moment. "Come with me," he said. They went to his study. He closed the door. He didn't sit. "Yoon acquired a position in your stepmother's debt chain 8 months ago," he said. "We knew about it. We moved to consolidate the full debt before he could use it." She processed that. "Use it how? You were already in Seoul, known to us, loosely, as Mirai's daughter. Yoon's interest in the debt." He stopped. A muscle in his jaw moved. "We believed he intended to use the debt as leverage, pressure Mirai into cooperation with his operation, use that cooperation to generate friction with us." "Friction," she repeated. "You mean use Mirai as a tool against you?" "Yes. And instead you bought the debt yourself." "Yes." She looked at him. The room was very still. Outside, a car moved up the driveway. One of his people, returning from somewhere. The sound of it faded. "So you came in with a marriage proposal," she said carefully. "To do what, exactly? Get me inside your house where Yoon couldn't use me. To get you out of his reach." His voice was completely even. "And yes, Inside my house. She breathed. She looked at the wall behind him. She looked back at him. That's protection, she said. Yes. Not. She stopped herself. She thought about the books, the art supplies, the specific brands, the margin note. Not only protection, he said quietly. She didn't respond to that. She couldn't, not yet, not with the full shape of what he'd said still settling into her understanding of the last several weeks. I need to know something, she said, and I need you to answer me honestly, not diplomatically. All right, am I a target? Right now, today? Am I someone Yoon is actively looking at? Jitae held her gaze. Possibly. His use of the journalist suggests he's testing the territory, seeing how connected you are to our situation. How connected I am. She almost laughed. I'm married to you. On paper. On paper, she repeated. He looked at her with something that was not quite uncomfortable but was adjacent to it, and she thought that was probably the most human she had seen him look since the day in his office. The arrangement keeps you protected, he said, as long as it's in place. And if it ends, he was quiet for a beat. Then we find another way to ensure your safety. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I have right now. She stood in the middle of his study and felt the walls of the situation close in another centimeter from every direction. Not his walls, not his doing, just the shape of the thing she had signed herself into, coming into full focus for the first time. Okay, she said. Okay, I'm not leaving. She picked up her bag from where she'd set it on the chair. I'm not breaking the contract. I'm staying. She looked at him once, direct and clear. But from now on, I want to know things when you know them, not after, not when I figure them out myself. She paused. That's the deal. He was quiet for a moment. That's not how I've operated. I'm aware. She held his gaze. Is that a problem? Another pause. Longer. His eyes moved across her face in the way they did when he was calculating something, and she had learned that when he calculated like this, the answer was usually different from what he'd started with. No, he said. It's not a problem. She nodded once. She left the study. She made it to the second-floor landing before her hands started shaking, just slightly, just for a moment, the delayed physical response to adrenaline and the particular vertigo of understanding that she had stepped past the point where she could frame any of this as something that was happening to her. She had just negotiated terms with a Mafia boss in his study, and he had agreed. She stood on the landing and breathed it out, and then her phone rang and she answered it without thinking, because she was still in the aftermath of the study, and it was a number she didn't recognize, and the voice on the other end was a woman's, low and careful and speaking in English. Miss Coleman. A pause. I'm going to say this once. Yoon Dae-ho knows you're asking questions. He knows you spoke to your stepmother tonight. Another pause. He wants you to know that the marriage contract doesn't protect you as much as your husband believes. The line went dead. She stood on the landing with the phone against her ear and the silence pouring through it, and somewhere below her, Jitae was still in his study, carrying the weight of an empire and the weight of a decision he had made months ago that had put her here, and she understood now with complete clarity that the contract she had signed in an office in Gangnam had never been. The line was dead, but she kept the phone against her ear anyway. It was an automatic thing, a body still catching up to what the mind had just received, the way you keep your hand on a stove burner for a half second after the heat registers. She stood on the landing and listened to the silence coming through the speaker and felt the particular cold that wasn't about temperature. He wants you to know that the marriage contract doesn't protect you as much as your husband believes. She lowered the phone. Below, the house was quiet. A light was on under Jitae's study door. She could hear nothing from inside it. He was the kind of man who made no unnecessary sound, who moved through spaces without claiming them the way other powerful men did. And she had noticed this and cataloged it, and now she stood on the landing above his closed door and understood that she had been building a picture of him for weeks, from exactly these kinds of details, and that the picture was incomplete in ways that could hurt her. She went downstairs, she knocked once and opened the door. He was on the phone. He looked at her face and said something quick into the receiver and hung up. Someone just called me, she said. Unknown number, a woman. She said, Yoon knows I spoke to Mireille tonight. She said, she stopped. She made herself say it clean. She said the contract doesn't protect me as much as you believe. Jite was already standing. When? 40 seconds ago. He crossed to the desk and picked up his own phone and was talking before she finished the sentence, Korean fast and low, a name, an instruction, another name. He held up one finger to her. Wait. And she waited, standing in the middle of his study with her arms crossed over her chest, not from cold, but from the need to hold something in place. He hung up. He looked at her. Did she say anything else? No, that was it. The number. She held out her phone. He took it, looked at it, photographed it with his own phone, handed it back. All of this in about 8 seconds, movements without wasted motion. Someone inside, she said. That's what this means. Someone who knew I called Mirai tonight is telling Yoon. He didn't answer right away. He turned to the window, the one that looked out over the front driveway, the gate, the dark line of trees, and stood with his back to her, and she watched his reflection in the glass and saw something in it she hadn't seen before. Not fear, not even close to fear. Something more controlled than fear and more dangerous. The face of a man rearranging pieces on a board and not liking where they were falling. Jite. He turned. Is there someone in this house working for Yoon? I don't know yet, he said. As of tonight, possibly. She breathed through that. Okay, what do I do? Nothing different. Act normally. I know how to act normally. She kept her voice level. I'm asking what happens next. He looked at her for a long moment. There was something moving in his expression that he was working to keep contained, and she could see the work of it, which meant he was either tired enough to let the seams show, or he was choosing to let her see it, and she didn't know yet which one it was. Let me handle tonight, he said. In the morning we talk. She nodded once. She went upstairs. She did not sleep. At 2 a.m, she went back to his library. She didn't turn on the overhead light, just the small lamp on the reading table, the one that threw a warm circle over the chair and left the rest of the room in shadow. She pulled a book at random and opened it and stared at the pages without reading them and thought. She thought about the woman's voice on the phone. American accent, she was now certain, not Korean, American. She thought about Mirai. She thought about the specific way Mirai had paused before giving her Yoon Dae-ho's name. Not the pause of someone reluctant to betray a confidence. The pause of someone calculating. She got up. She went to the shelves and found the section on property and contract law. Jitai had an entire shelf of it, dense legal texts, some of them in English. And she pulled the 3rd volume because it was slightly more worn than the others, and people hid things in familiar books. She was not looking for anything specific. She was doing what she did when she couldn't sleep and couldn't stop thinking, which was move through a space with her hands until something told her where to look. Nothing in the law books. She moved along the wall. History. Economics. A shelf of organizational files she hadn't noticed before. Thin folders standing upright between 2 bookends. She pulled one. Put it back. Pulled the next. The 3rd folder had a tab that read, in Jitai's small, neat handwriting, Coleman, initial. She stood very still. She looked at the folder in her hands. She opened it. Wotam. It took her 11 minutes to read through it. She knew because she checked the clock when she started and checked it again when she finished. Some automatic record-keeping instinct running underneath the thing that was happening to the rest of her. The folder contained 4 documents. The first was a summary sheet, a profile, professionally compiled, the kind of thing she had seen in crime dramas and had not expected to see with her own name at the top. Name, age, nationality, educational history, current sole address, employment status, physical description, social connections. The profile was dated 14 months ago. 14 months, 7 months before Mirai's debt had reached critical mass. The second document was a financial analysis of Mirai's debt situation, detailed, going back further than 14 months, further than 2 years. It showed the full timeline of Mirai's borrowing, private lenders, then Yoon's network, then the final consolidation. And in the margins, in that same small handwriting, annotations. Not the language of a creditor monitoring a debt, the language of someone tracking an opportunity. The third document was a printout of an online article, an art magazine, small circulation, English language, covering an exhibition at a Seoul gallery 3 years ago. She recognized the exhibition. She had spoken there, 20 minutes on identity and displacement and what it meant to make art in a country that wasn't yours. The article quoted her at length. At the top of the printout, underlined in pen, "This is what it costs." The same line from the library book. She had thought it was a note about the novel. It was a note about her. The fourth document was a handwritten page, not formatted like the others, not a professional document. It looked more like something written for himself, private, the handwriting slightly less controlled than his usual precision. She read it once and then read it again because the first time she had skipped over sentences without absorbing them. It said, "I have no intention of using the debt as leverage. The arrangement, if she agrees, must be on terms that protect her completely. If she refuses, the debt gets transferred to a clean account and discharged. She doesn't need to know about this. What she needs is a way out that preserves everything her stepmother destroyed. If I can give her that, and only that, it's enough." Then below it, one more line, separate from the rest, written like it had been added later. It has to be enough. She closed the folder. She put it back exactly where she'd found it. Third from the left, same angle, spine flush with the others. She turned off the reading lamp. She sat in the dark. He was in the kitchen at 6 a.m. when she came downstairs. He was on his second coffee, papers in front of him, suit already on. Either he had slept in it or he hadn't slept at all. And from the specific quality of stillness around his eyes, she thought the latter. He looked up when she walked in. She poured herself coffee. She sat down. She looked at him. "You knew who I was before the debt," she said. The kitchen went very quiet. Not the easy quiet of early morning, but the specific quiet that happened when a sentence landed in a room and took up all the space. Jitai set down his cup. He did not look away from her. "Yes. The gallery exhibition, 3 years ago." Pause. "Yes. You had a profile built on me, 14 months ago." His jaw tightened, just slightly. "Yes." She kept her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. She needed something to hold. "The debt. You saw that Yoon was moving on it and you moved first." "Yes. But you had already been watching. Before Yoon, before any of this." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was measured, and she could hear the effort in the measuring. Watching is not the right word. What is the right word? He looked at the table. "Aware of. I was aware of you." "For how long?" "Since the exhibition." He paused. "You spoke about identity, about what it cost to belong to something that didn't fully claim you." He looked up at her. I had never heard anyone say that particular thing out loud before. She looked at him. She looked at the face of a man who had built walls 17 layers deep and was currently standing on the wrong side of all of them and knew it. "That's not a reason to build a file on someone," she said. "No, it isn't. It's not a reason to buy someone's debt." "No. It could be called obsession," she said. "What you did, the profile, the monitoring, the—" She stopped. She made herself breathe. "It could very easily be called obsession." He held her gaze. He didn't flinch from the word. "I know what it looks like." "Do you?" "Yes." His voice was very quiet. "I also know what I intended and what I didn't intend, and I understand that the difference between those things is not your problem to sort out." He paused. "I didn't move on your stepmother's debt to trap you. I moved on it because Yoon was going to use it to damage you, and because—" He stopped. "Say it." He looked at her. For the first time since she had known him, something in his composure actually fractured, not dramatically, not visibly to anyone who hadn't been studying his face for weeks. But she had been studying his face for weeks. "Because I wanted one chance," he said, "not to own anything, not to force anything. One chance to be relevant to your life, in some way, anyway." He looked away. "The document you found, yes, I know you found it. I know exactly where everything in that room is, says what I actually intended. If you'd refused in my office, the debt would have been cleared, and you would have walked out without knowing I existed." She sat with that for a long time. The clock ticked somewhere. Outside, the garden was cold and gray and still. "The fourth document," she said. "The handwritten one." He didn't answer. "It has to be enough," she said. "That's what you wrote. It has to be enough." She looked at him. That's someone writing themselves a limit. That's someone telling themselves to stop before they... She stopped. You were trying to stop yourself. He said nothing. He was looking at the table, and the line of his shoulders had something in it she hadn't seen before, a specific tension that she associated with people trying very hard not to be seen. She stood up. She picked up her coffee cup and stood at the window with her back to him. I'm not leaving, she said. He was quiet. I should, probably. By most reasonable assessments of this situation, I should get my bag and call Park and end the contract. She looked at the garden. But I'm not going to, and I need you to understand that it's not because of the debt, and it's not because of the properties, and it's not because of Yoon. She turned around. It's because that handwritten page is the most honest thing I've seen from you. And it scared me, and I don't run from things that scare me. He looked at her. But I'm furious, she said. I want you to know that. I'm completely furious. About the profile, about the monitoring, about the fact that you've been 10 moves ahead of this situation since before it started, and you've been feeding me information in careful portions, like I'm someone who needs managing. Her voice was steady, and she hated that it was steady because she wanted it not to be, wanted to be able to put the full force of what she felt into the sound of it. That ends today. You tell me everything, not portions, everything. Zariah, is that a problem? He held her gaze. No, he said, it's not a problem. Good. She put her cup down. Then tell me what you found out last night about who made that call. He was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up the papers in front of him and turned them so she could see. A staff member. Lee Jun-ho, household maintenance, hired 11 months ago through a placement agency. The agency has connections to Yoon's network. He paused. He was removed from the property at 3 a.m. Removed. He's in a secure location, being questioned. She processed that. And he told us something we didn't know. Jitae's voice shifted. The quality of the quiet around his words changed, became something with weight in it. Yoon's operation isn't just moving on our territories. He has a specific objective. He looked at her directly. You. She stood very still. Not as leverage, not as pressure. Jitae held her gaze. As a direct target, there's a plan in place to take you, to use you to force a negotiation that ends with me vacating 3 of our primary corridors. He paused. He's been building toward it since before the marriage. The journalist, the phone call, those were tests. Seeing how isolated you are, how protected. She heard her own heartbeat for a moment. When, she said. We don't have a date? Lee didn't know one, but the pieces are in place. He stood. I'm moving you to a different part of the house. I'm adding... That's not what I'm asking. She stepped forward. I'm asking, but given everything you know, given the fact that Yoon has been building this for months, how close are we to him actually moving? Jitae looked at her. The answer was in the way he looked at her. Close, she said. Yes. She nodded once. She was processing fast, the way she did under pressure, running through the geometry of what she now knew. The file, the debt, the marriage, the mole in the house, the woman on the phone, the plan that had been in motion since before she walked into that office in Gangnam and picked up a pen. She had thought she was making a choice that day. She was beginning to understand that the choice had already been made for her by more people than she'd known, and that the only real choice she'd had was the one she made after. The choice to stay, the choice to learn, the choice to walk into his library at 2 a.m. and find a folder with her name on it and come downstairs at 6 and put the truth on the table between them. That choice was hers. All right, she said. Tell me everything you know about Yoon's operation. Structure, key people, how they move. She looked at him. If I'm going to be used as bait, I want to understand the trap. Jitae went very still. You're not going to be... I know you're going to try to prevent it. I'm asking you to tell me anyway. Because if something goes wrong, I want to be the most dangerous person in the room, and right now I don't know enough to be dangerous. She held his gaze. Tell me. He looked at her for a long, long moment. Then he sat back down and began to... He told her everything. It took 2 hours and 4 cups of coffee and a map of Seoul spread across the kitchen table with marks on it that she was not supposed to see. And by the end of it, she understood the full architecture of what Yoon Dae-ho had built, and why it was dangerous, and exactly how many points of entry it had into her life. Yoon was 51 years old and had been operating in Seoul's criminal infrastructure for 26 years, which meant he had survived long enough to be patient. His organization ran 12 legitimate front businesses and an unknown number of illegitimate ones across 4 districts. He had connections inside 2 government agencies that Ji-tae knew of and suspected more. He had been waiting for the right pressure point against the C organization for 3 years, and he had found it not in territory or money or personnel, but in a woman from Atlanta who had stayed in Seoul too long because she didn't know how to leave things unfinished. She absorbed all of it without interrupting. She asked 3 questions, each one precise, each one aimed at a gap in what he was telling her. He answered all 3 without deflecting, which was new, and she noticed it and filed it next to the other things she was filing about him that she still hadn't fully processed. When he finished, she stood up and looked at the map. "The shipping terminal," she said, "in Yeongdeungpo. That's where Choi's body was found." "Yes. That's also where Yoon's main logistics operation runs." "Yes. So when he moves, he'll use it as a staging point." "We believe so." Ji-tae traced a line on the map with one finger, not touching the paper, just following the route in the air above it. "The problem is timing. We can put people there, but if we move too early, he changes the plan and we lose the advantage of knowing the location." She looked at the terminal's position on the map. The Han River on one side, industrial blocks on 3 others, 1 primary access road. "He's going to move soon," she said. "Within the week, possibly sooner." She looked at him. "You're not going to tell me to go somewhere else, to leave Seoul, would you?" "No." He nodded once. "Then we do this the right way." 3 days later, at 11:47 in the morning, Zoraya was in the CO Estate's East Garden when the first car came through the gate. It was not one of Ji-tae's cars. She knew Ji-tae's cars by now. The specific black of them, the particular model, the way his drivers moved through the gate at a speed that was deliberate and controlled. This car came through fast and wrong, and before she had fully processed the difference, her body was already moving, some animal part of her that had absorbed 3 days of threat briefings and was running on that information now without waiting for her conscious mind to catch up. She was 12 steps from the side entrance when the second car followed the first through the gate. She heard shouting from the front of the house. She heard something break, glass, the specific high register of a window, and then she heard gunfire, close enough to feel in her chest, and she stopped thinking and started running. She made the side entrance. The door was unlocked. She went through it and into the service corridor and pressed herself against the wall and breathed. Her heart was very loud. The corridor smelled like cleaning products and wood polish, and she focused on that because focusing on something concrete kept her from the edge of the panic that was right there, right at the perimeter of her control. Ji-tae had told her, if something happens, the east corridor, the door at the end, the room behind it. Stay there. Wait. She ran the corridor. She hit the door at the end with her shoulder and went through and into the small utility room with its one window, and she looked through the window and saw 3 men she didn't recognize crossing the garden at a run. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Ji-tae. Don't move, we're coming. She typed back. 3 men, East Garden, coming toward. The door behind her opened. She spun. The man who came through was not Ji-tae. He was broad, mid-40s, a face that had been hit many times in specific places, dressed in the dark clothing of someone who had planned to move fast in low light. He looked at her with the expression of a man who had found exactly what he was looking for and was pleased about the efficiency of it. Miss Coleman, he said in accented English, come with me. She looked at the door. She looked at him. She looked at the window. No, she said. He moved toward her and she threw the only thing she had, her phone, a reflexive, desperate throw aimed at his face, which he blocked with one arm, and in the half-second he was blocked, she went for the window latch, got it open, and was halfway through when his hand closed around her wrist, and the world lurched, and she hit the ground outside hard enough to knock the air out of her, gravel and frozen grass against her palms. And he came through the window after her, and she was up and running before he had his footing. She ran toward the sound of the gunfire. Later she would understand this was the instinctive wrong-right decision, moving toward danger rather than away from it, toward Ji-tae's people rather than away from everything. But in the moment, it was not a decision at all. It was just her legs and the cold air and the hard sound of someone behind her. She came around the corner of the house and ran directly into Park Sung-jin. Park caught her by both arms, steadied her, looked past her shoulder in the single second before the man from the utility room came around the corner and stopped when he saw that Park was not alone. Behind Park were two men with weapons drawn and expressions that left no ambiguity about what happened next. The man from the utility room assessed the math and ran. Park held Zoraya's arms until she stopped pulling against him. "Are you hurt?" "No." She was breathing hard. Her palms were bleeding from the gravel. "Where is he?" "Inside. Mr. Seo is—" More gunfire from the front of the house, closer. Multiple shots. Not the single sharp reports of before, but something sustained, a fight rather than a warning. Zoraya pulled free of Park's hands and moved toward the sound. "Ms. Coleman," she went through the main entrance. The front hall was destroyed. Not the word she would have used before this moment. She would have said damaged or compromised or some other term that kept the reality at arm's length. But the front hall of the Seo estate was simply destroyed. A car had come through the gate and partially through the front wall, and the entry foyer had 3 men down and not moving and 2 more fighting at the base of the staircase. And at the center of all of it was Ji-Tai. She stopped in the doorway and had 1 second to take in the scene before the geometry of it resolved, and she understood what she was seeing. He was fighting 2 men simultaneously at the bottom of the stairs, moving with a precision that was almost clinical except for the blood. There was blood on his left sleeve, dark and spreading, a wound somewhere above the elbow that he was clearly not accounting for in the way he was moving. One of the men went down. The other pressed him toward the wall, and Ji-Tai used the wall, pushed off it, and put the second man on the floor in a movement that looked like it had been practiced until it was reflexive. He was breathing hard when he turned and saw her. "I told you to stay in the room," he said. "Someone found the room." She crossed the destroyed hall toward him, glass and debris under her feet. "You're bleeding." "I know." He was already scanning the space, checking corners, the automatic threat assessment of a man who had never stopped running that process. "Where's Park?" "Behind me." She reached him and looked at his arm. The sleeve was soaked through from elbow to cuff. "How bad?" "Not deep. I need you to—" He stopped. His attention had shifted to something past her shoulder, and his entire body went into a different register of alert. And she felt it before she turned, felt the change in the air around him, felt the sudden absolute stillness of a man looking at something that changed the calculation entirely. She turned. Mirai was standing in the front doorway. Not running, not frightened. Standing in the doorway of the destroyed hall with the careful stillness of a woman who had arrived, not been brought here. Behind her, partially obscured, was a man Zoraya had never seen but somehow recognized from the photographs Ji-Tai had shown her on the map. Older, compact, the flat eyes of someone who had stopped finding things difficult, Yoon Dae-ho. The room went very quiet. Even the sound from outside seemed to dim. Zoraya looked at her stepmother. Mirai's eyes met hers and then moved away. And in that movement, in that specific refusal to hold her gaze, the last piece of it fell into place. Not a suspicion, a fact. Solid and cold and already complete. "You've been working with him," Zoria said. Her voice came out so flat it didn't even sound like her. "The whole time." Miri said nothing. "The debt," Zoraya said. "The journalist, the mole in the house, the phone call about the contract." She felt Ji-Tai move slightly beside her, and she put out one hand and he stopped. "You told them when I called you. You told them what I asked about. You've been feeding them information since before—" She stopped. She looked at her stepmother's face and tried to find something there and found only the specific hollowness of a person who had made their decision far enough in the past that they'd stopped second-guessing it. "My father," she said. "Did he know what you were?" Mirai flinched. The first movement. "Don't." "Did he know?" "He's gone." Miri's voice came out rough. "Whatever he knew doesn't—" "He loved you," Zoraya said. "He asked me to take care of you. He held my hand and asked me to take care of you, and I said I would. And you—" She stopped. There was something in her throat. She swallowed it down hard. "You used that." Yoon moved forward from the doorway. He moved the way he seemed to do everything. deliberately, with the patience of someone who knew they had the advantage and saw no reason to hurry. He was looking at Jitai. "This is finished," Yoon said. His Korean was the Korean of authority, the register of someone accustomed to rooms that rearranged themselves for him. "You know what I want. The Yeongdungpo corridor, the 2 Mapo properties, and full withdrawal from the Hanam network. Sign it over and this ends." Jitai said nothing. "You have people down," Yoon said. 2 at the front gate, 1 in the east garden. Your wife ran through a utility room to get away from my man, which tells me your security situation is not what it should be." He glanced at Zariah with the specific dismissiveness of a man who had spent his life looking at people and sorting them into useful and not useful. "She's a complication, not an asset. You reorganized your entire operation around protecting a woman who is never going to give you what you actually want." Jitae's arm was still bleeding. She could feel the warmth of it where their hands had briefly made contact. He was standing completely still, and his face was completely empty, and she had learned that the emptier his face was, the more dangerous the thing running behind it. "What I want," Jitai said, "is for you to step back from the door." Yoon almost smiled. Or the 3 people behind you who you didn't see come through the east side gate 20 seconds ago are going to have a problem. The pause that followed was very precise. 3 seconds. Yoon's flat eyes moved, the first involuntary movement she'd seen from him. And in those 3 seconds, Zariah did what she had been doing this entire time, which was watch and calculate and file. She stepped sideways, toward Mirai. Jitae caught her arm. "Don't! Let me." She looked at him. 1 second, direct. "Let me." He looked at her face. He released her arm. She crossed the destroyed hall and stopped in front of her stepmother. Up close, Mirai looked like she hadn't slept in days. Skin gray, eyes undercut by dark swelling, the specific deterioration of a person who had been carrying something corrosive and could feel it doing its work. She was wearing a coat that Zariah recognized. It had been a birthday gift from Zariah's father 3 years ago. "I'm not going to tell you what I think of you," Zariah said quietly. Not a whisper. Not low enough to hide. Just human scale, woman to woman, with the shouting and the standoff happening 6 feet away in the same room. "You already know." Mirai looked at the floor. "I'm going to tell you one thing," Zariah said, "and I need you to hear it." She waited until Mirai's eyes came up. "Whatever he promised you, whatever Yoon offered that made this worth it, he's not going to give it to you, because people like him never pay in full." She held her stepmother's gaze. "You know that. I can see that you know that." Mary's jaw tightened. Something moved through her face that was too complicated to name and too painful to look at directly. "It's too late, Zariah." "It's not. I already—" Her voice broke slightly. She pulled it back. "I already gave him everything he needed to do this. The timing, the access points, the staff information. It's done." "Then tell me what he's planning next." Zariah stepped closer. "Right now, right this second. What is the next move?" Behind her, she heard Yoon's voice harden, and Jitai's voice answer it, and the specific sounds of a room full of armed men deciding which direction to fall. She kept her eyes on Mirai. Mirai looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since the doorway. And Zariah saw it. The thing underneath all the rest of it, the thing that had been there when she was 17 and grieving, and Mirai had talked to her through 2 nights of jet lag, the specific warmth of a woman who knew how to love people even when she was destroying them. "The terminal," Miri said, barely a sound. "Tonight. They're moving everything through the terminal tonight. That was always the plan. This—" She glanced at the room, the wreckage, you negotiating 10 feet away. "This was to keep you here. Keep Jitae here. Divide his people while the operation runs." Zariah turned. "Jitae." Her voice cut across the room. He looked at her. "It's a diversion," she said. "The terminal. Tonight." The shift in his face was immediate. He looked at Yoon, and she watched him do the calculation in real time, watched him understand that he had been divided from his operation on purpose, that the attack on the estate was theater, expensive theater, designed to hold him in place while the actual move happened elsewhere. Yoon saw him understand it. "Don't," Yoon said. His voice lost the patience for the first time. "Seo." Jitae was already on his phone. 2 words, fast, and then he looked at Yoon with an expression that was the most frightening thing Zoraya had seen in this room, which was saying something given the current state of the room. You built this for 2 years, Ji-tae said, and you put it in the hands of a woman who still had a conscience. Yoon moved. Fast for his age, faster than she expected, and what he moved toward was her. Not Ji-tae, not the door, but Zoraya. The specific calculation of a man who understood leverage and was making one last bid to reclaim it. She had 1 second to see him coming and 1 second to decide, and she did not step back. She stepped forward. She hit him with everything she had, shoulder, momentum, the full force of a woman who was furious and terrified and had been running on adrenaline for 4 days. And Yoon was not expecting it because he had looked at her with those flat eyes and sorted her into not useful, and useful didn't fight back, and the impact staggered him left. Enough, just enough for Ji-tae to close the distance and put himself between them. And then it was over in seconds. Yoon down. Ji-tae's people through the door. The standoff collapsed in under 40 seconds. Yoon's men read the room the way professionals read rooms. Quickly, without sentiment, with the specific arithmetic of people who understood that the calculation had shifted and that dying for a losing position was not loyalty, but waste. 3 of them put weapons down. 2 tried the east corridor and ran into Park's people. 1 made it to the garden and didn't make it further. Yoon himself was on the floor with Ji-tae's knee on his back and his arms pinned, and he was not struggling, which Zoraya thought said more about him than anything else she'd witnessed. He had stopped when stopping was the only rational option. No rage, no final speech, just the flat-eyed pragmatism of a man filing away the defeat and already thinking about the next move. Except there wasn't going to be a next move, and some part of him knew it. Ji-tae looked up at her from the floor. His left arm was still bleeding. His face was the controlled, empty face she had learned to read past. And past it, underneath it, was something that looked like relief so acute it was almost painful to see. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No." She looked at her hands. The palms were scraped raw from the gravel, dried blood at the edges. "Your arm!" "I know." Park was already on the phone. The sound of vehicles outside, more of them, the right kind, and the particular shift in the air that happened when a situation moved from active to contained. Ji-tae handed Yoon to 2 of his men and stood, and she watched him stand, watched the way he held his left arm slightly away from his body, watched his face go through the private assessment of a man cataloging damage and deciding what could wait. She crossed the destroyed hall to him. Glass and plaster dust under her feet, the acrid smell of something that had burned briefly and been extinguished, the specific cold that came through the gap where the car had broken the front wall. She stopped in front of him and looked at his arm and then at his face. "Hospital," she said. "Later. Now." She held his gaze. "You have 2 people at the gate who went down. You need to know how bad. And you need your arm looked at before later becomes a problem." She paused. "And I'm not asking." Something in the vicinity of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The neighborhood of one. "All right," he said. She turned to find Mirai. Her stepmother was still standing near the doorway, not restrained, not fleeing. Just standing, with the specific paralysis of a person who had reached the end of a road they'd been walking for a long time and found nothing on the other side of it. Park was near her, not touching her, watching her with the careful attention of a man who had been given instructions. Zoraya walked over. Mirai looked at her. The coat, her father's birthday gift, was dusty from the hall. Her eyes were red but dry, the exhaustion of someone who had already spent whatever she had left. "The police are coming," Zoraya said. "I know. I'm not going to help you with that. I want you to understand that clearly." She kept her voice level. "I'm not going to lie for you or mitigate what you did or ask Ji-tae to use his lawyers on your behalf." She paused. "What you did to this house tonight, the people who got hurt, the 2 years of feeding Yoon information, that's yours. All of it." Mirai nodded, a small movement, like she had known this was coming and had decided to receive it without argument. "But I'm going to tell you one more thing," Zoraya said. "And this is the last thing I'm going to say to you for a long time, so I need you to hold on to it." She waited until Mirai was fully looking at her. "My father loved you. Whatever you became, whatever you did, when he was alive, he loved you, and that was real. It happened. Nobody gets to take that away from it, not even you. She felt the thing in her throat again. She let it be there this time. I think you know you threw something away that most people never find. I think you're going to have a long time to understand exactly what that cost. She stepped back. That's all. She walked back to Jitai. He had heard all of it. She could tell by the quality of his stillness. He looked at her face, and she looked back at him, and neither of them said anything about it, because some things didn't need commentary, and this was one of them. Let's go, she said. They went. The hospital was private, a facility in Seongbuk that treated its patients with the discretion of an institution that understood who its clients were. Jitai's arm required 11 stitches. The wound was clean, a knife rather than a bullet, which he told her in the car in the same tone you'd use to describe a minor inconvenience. And the doctor who closed it did so with the efficiency of someone who had closed similar wounds before on similar people without asking too many questions. 2 of Jitai's men had been shot. One in the shoulder, which was going to hurt for months, but was not going to kill him. One in the thigh, which was closer. Both alive, both going to stay that way. She sat in the waiting room while Jitai was being stitched and stared at the wall and let herself feel, for the first time since the garden, the full weight of the last several hours. It came in waves, the man's hand on her wrist in the utility room, the gravel under her palms, Mireille in the doorway, the specific sound of Yoon hitting the floor. She breathed through each wave and let it pass. An older nurse brought her antiseptic and bandaging for her palms without being asked. She cleaned the scrapes herself, methodically, focusing on the sting of it because the sting was concrete, and concrete was useful right now. Jitai came out 40 minutes later with his arm properly dressed and his suit jacket replaced by a hospital-issue pullover that he wore with the resigned dignity of a man making peace with circumstances. He sat down next to her in the waiting room and looked at her bandaged hands and then at her face. The terminal, she said. Our people got there in time. Yoon's operation was moving product through the loading facility, his main logistics, the financial records, the full infrastructure. We have it. He paused. All of it. She nodded slowly. The Yoon faction is finished, he said. Without the infrastructure and without him, it doesn't survive. The pieces will scatter, some will negotiate, some will try to rebuild under someone else. He looked at the wall across from them. It'll take time, but it's finished. She sat with that. The end of something. The specific silence that followed the end of things. When the noise stopped, and what was left was just the people who had survived it, sitting in a hospital waiting room with bandaged hands and 11 stitches and too much to say. I should have told you about the file earlier, he said. She turned to look at him. It had not been what she expected him to lead with. The profile. The monitoring. He was looking straight ahead. His jaw was tight. I told myself it was protective, that my reasons were clean enough. But you walked into a situation I had engineered without knowing it was engineered, and that's... He stopped. That's not something I can make a clean argument for. She looked at his profile, the long line of his jaw, the specific tension in it, the hands in his lap, still and careful, a man who had learned very early to keep his hands still so that nothing he was feeling showed in them. No, she said. You can't. I know. And I'm still furious about it. She looked back at the wall. I want to be clear about that. I'm still... The file, the years of it, the way you knew things about me that I hadn't told you, that doesn't go away. I know, he said again, but... She breathed. The handwritten page, what it actually said. She paused. I've been thinking about it for weeks and I can't find the malice in it. I can find the obsession. I can find the presumption. I can find a man who made decisions about my life that weren't his to make. She turned to look at him. But I can't find the malice. He turned to look at her. And that distinction matters to me, she said. I don't know if it should, but it does. The waiting room was very quiet. Outside, the night was cold and clear, the first clear night in what felt like weeks. What happens now? He said. She looked at him for a long moment, at the hospital pullover and the dressed arm, and the face that was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the last several hours and everything to do with the last several years. at the man who had funded orphanages in secret and stayed awake carrying an empire he hadn't wanted, and written himself a limit in a private document and then blown past it and known he was blowing past it and done it anyway. Now, she said, we figure out what's actually true. The estate took 3 weeks to repair. Not the physical damage. That was faster, contractors moving through the front hall with the efficient energy of people paid well to not ask questions. The other repair. The slower one. She stayed. She had known she was going to stay before they left the hospital, had known it in the waiting room sitting next to him while he struggled through an honest accounting of himself, which was clearly not a thing he did often and cost him something real each time. She stayed not because the contract required it, and not because of the debt, and not because of Yoon or the properties or any of the architecture of obligation that had brought her here originally. She stayed because the morning after the estate, sitting at the kitchen table while his arm was dressed by the house doctor, she had looked at his face and understood that the picture she had been building of him for weeks was complete now. Not clean, not simple. Not the monster the city had decided he was, and not the man she had imagined when she signed a contract in a Gangnam office with a pen that felt heavier than it should have. Something real. Something with damage in it and history in it, and a specific lonely intelligence that had spent 34 years building walls and then, apparently, had met a woman in a gallery exhibition and written himself a note about what it cost. She understood something about that. She had her own notes to herself she had never shown anyone. The divorce papers came in the mail 3 weeks after the terminal. She hadn't known they were coming. A legal formality, the contract's built-in process, triggered at the 1-year mark regardless of what either party wanted. They arrived in a formal envelope with the law firm's letterhead, and she set them on the kitchen table and looked at them for a long time. Jitae was in his study when she picked them up and took them to him. He looked at the envelope. He looked at her face the way he always did first, reading it before anything else. She opened the envelope and took out the papers and put them on his desk. She uncapped the pen from his desk cup and signed her name on the signature line. She looked at what she had done. Then she slid the papers across the desk to him. He looked at them. The contract is done, she said. The debt is canceled. The properties are yours. They're cleared. Miri's situation is a legal matter between her and the courts, and it has nothing to do with either of us anymore. She paused. Everything that brought us here is finished. He looked at the papers. He looked at her signature. He looked up at her. Zoraya, I want to show you something. She reached into the back pocket of her jeans and put a second document on the desk, next to the divorce papers. Not a formal document. A single page, handwritten, the lines slightly uneven because she had written it at 2 a.m. a week ago, sitting in his library with the small lamp on. He looked at it. He didn't pick it up. He read it where it lay. She watched his face while he read. She had written, I came here with nothing I chose. I'm staying with everything I've decided. This is not a contract. It doesn't have an expiration date or an exit clause or a financial provision. It has the following terms, which are the only terms I'm interested in. Honesty, including the difficult kind. Full information, always. No more files, no more monitoring, no more managed portions of the truth. The freedom to be furious when I'm furious and to say so. And whatever this is, whatever we have become in this house over the last year, I want to keep it, not because I have to, because I'm choosing to. The debt is paid, the contract is finished. This is what's left when all of that is gone. She had signed it at the bottom. Her full name, the same signature as the divorce papers. Jitae read it twice. She watched him read it the second time more slowly, line by line, the way he read things that mattered. His face did the thing it did when something got past the wall. The slight change around the eyes, the jaw loosening its set, the particular quality of stillness that was different from his controlled stillness because it was not controlled at all. When he looked up, his eyes were wet, not spilling over, just changed. The specific brightness of a person receiving something they had told themselves for a very long time that they did not deserve. He picked up the pen. He signed the divorce papers first. Clean, final. He set them aside. Then he signed her handwritten page, below her name, and the pen shook slightly on the last letter of his name, and she saw it, and he let her see it. She picked up the page. She folded it twice and put it in her pocket. She sat down across from him and looked at his face, and he looked at hers, and the study was quiet around them. The house settling into its repaired bones, the city somewhere below doing its endless work, indifferent and vast. I have a condition, she said. He waited. The criminal operations. I'm not going to live in the middle of this indefinitely. She held his gaze. I'm not asking you to flip a switch. I understand what it is, what it's connected to, how long it takes to unwind something like this. But I need to know you're moving away from it. Not for me. Because, she paused, because you fund orphanages, because you pay medical bills, because you read the margins of books about what things cost, and you understand the answer. She looked at him. You already know what you want to build. I've seen it in the library. I just need you to actually build it. He held her gaze for a long time. It won't be fast. I know. There will be pieces of it that are harder to exit than others. I know that too. And you're willing to... I'm not willing to wait forever, she said, but I'm willing to be part of building something real. Yes. She paused. That's my condition. He nodded once, slowly. Then I accept it. Spring came to Seoul the way it always did, indifferently, without ceremony. The cold simply deciding 1 week to be less cold and the trees responding before the city had fully registered the change. The CO Group's first legitimate real estate development broke ground in March. Jitai attended the ceremony in a suit without a tie and shook hands with the city planning officials and signed the documents in front of a small collection of journalists, none of whom had the full story and all of whom were writing pieces that were half right in different directions. Zaria stood at the edge of the gathering with coffee she'd bought from a cart 50 meters away and watched him work the crowd and thought about the man who had watched her speak at a gallery exhibition 3 years ago and written down a single line about what things cost. She thought about the distance between that moment and this one, the strange, violent, unglamorous distance of it. He found her at the edge after the journalists left. You're supposed to be in the center, she said. I am in the center, he said. You're at the edge. She handed him the remaining half of her coffee. He took it without looking at it. The Hanum property closes next week, he said. The network transfer is... I know. Park briefed me. He looked at her. You and Park talk. Park respects competence, I've noticed. She looked at the construction site, the freshly turned earth, the outline of what was going to be built there. It's going to take years. Yes. The city doesn't know yet what you're doing. No. When they figure it out, they're going to write a different kind of story about you. He was quiet for a moment. Does that matter to you? She thought about that honestly, about the headlines she had read with her stepmother's photograph in them and her own name attached like a verdict, about 12 million views and a woman named So-Ra who had moved on to other targets, as people like that always did. About Destiny calling from Atlanta last month and saying you sound different, and Zariah saying different how, and Destiny saying like someone who knows where they are. Not much, she said. Not anymore. He stood beside her and they looked at the construction site together in the mild spring morning, and the coffee grew cold, and neither of them moved. The wedding was in September, on a Sunday, with 9 people present. They had chosen the terrace of a private property above the Han River, the same terrace where Jitai had stood many evenings alone in the year before everything changed, looking at the water and the city below it, and carrying whatever he carried in those quiet hours before the house woke up. Zariah had only learned about those evenings recently. She had asked what he did when he couldn't sleep, and he had told her simply that he stood on the terrace and waited for morning. And she had thought about the man in that image for a long time, the particular loneliness of it, and she had said, let's get married there, and he had looked at her with an expression that was past the wall entirely, fully undefended, the face of someone ambushed by something they wanted. The 9 people were Park, who served as a witness and cried once briefly and denied it. Destiny, who had flown from Atlanta and spent the morning alternating between joy and the specific emotional combativeness of a best friend who had worried herself hollow and needed to express it somewhere. 2 of Jitai's men who had been with him the longest, who stood in their good suits with the straight-backed formality of people treating the occasion with more ceremony than it had asked for, which she found she loved. The house doctor, the kitchen staff member who had, on the morning after the estate attack, silently made tea for 2 people sitting at a kitchen table trying to understand what they were to each other and whom Jitai had apparently invited without explanation, and who had come without asking for one, and Zoraya, and Jitai. She wore a dress she had chosen herself, deep green, nothing borrowed or mandated, nothing chosen by a stylist or approved by a PR firm. He wore a dark suit and no tie, and she noticed when she walked onto the terrace that his hands were not still. He was holding them at his sides with the careful awareness of a man who had been told once that his hands gave nothing away and was discovering they did, now, here, in this specific moment. She walked to him. He looked at her the way he had looked at nothing else in the time she had known him, completely, without deflection, with the full force of an attention that had frightened her once and no longer did. She looked back at him the same way. The efficient was brief. The words were the standard words and they were adequate. What mattered was not the words but the specific weight of the air around them, the river below catching the September light, the city spread out past the railing and its millions of lives, none of which knew or cared what was happening on this terrace. When it was done, Jitai took her hand, not a formal gesture, not a performance for the 9 people watching, just a man reaching for a hand because it was there and it was hers, a touch that said, "This is real, and I know it's real, and I don't need anyone else to tell me." She held his hand. Destiny was making a sound she recognized, the sound that came before crying, quickly converted to a throat clearing. And Park was looking at the river with the expression of a man deeply invested in the quality of the water today. And the 2 men in good suits were looking at their shoes. And the kitchen staff member had both hands pressed together in front of her mouth. "You're shaking," Zoraya said quietly. "I know," he said. "You ran a criminal empire for 8 years and you're shaking." That was easier than this. She looked at his face, at the specific vulnerability of a man who had built his entire life around the principle that nothing could reach him, standing on a terrace above the Han River in September, reached. She leaned up and kissed him. Not a performance, not a seal on a contract. A kiss that tasted like coffee and the cold edge of the morning and the full complicated weight of what they had walked through to get here, the debt and the file and the destroyed hall and Mirai and the doorway and the hospital waiting room and the handwritten page and all the nights she had sat in his library with the small lamp on and thought about what things cost. It cost this. Exactly this. She pulled back. She looked at him. "All right," she said. He looked at her. His eyes were bright. His hands had stopped shaking. "All right," he said. Below them the Han River ran south, as it always had, indifferent and permanent, carrying the city's weight without comment, moving through the September morning toward the sea. The sun was on the water, the city went on. 9 people stood on a terrace, and the moment held itself briefly in the air, the way certain moments did. The ones that didn't announce themselves as significant until you were already inside them. And then it passed into the past where it would stay, solid and real, unchanged by whatever came after. No debt, no contract, no obligation but the one they had chosen. The woman who had stayed too long, and the man who had waited too quietly, and the city that had tried to make the story something smaller than it was. That was all. That was enough. Fade out.